Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. All right. Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where I am very, very excited to be joined by a special guest, Lana Burl. Is it Lana or?
Yes, Lana, like Lana Banana.
Like Lana Banana. Okay, we'll never forget that. I'm excited to be joined by special guest, Lana Burl, who is a fellow coach specializing in triathlete coaching, which is really cool. We are here today to talk about swimming for runners. And, you might be wondering like, what, why, like what a strange topic, but I'm going to give you the background and the reason why I became very fascinated with the idea of talking about swimming and running, kind of the crossover there as we kind of get through our questions today. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me.
Yes, I'm thrilled to be here. Let's do it.
All right, amazing. So I, both myself and I'm sure the audience listening want to get to know you a little bit better first before we dive into me grilling you about swimming. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your education, and the work that you do now with athletes.
Sure. So education, I actually studied chemical engineering as an undergrad, and I have a master's in nutrition. I didn't go dietetics. I actually did more like molecular biology and cell research and that kind of thing. And, I got into coaching through my own journey as an athlete. I started doing triathlon over 15 years ago. And it was just friends saying, hey, I think you would love this. And they were right. The trick was when we first started, I really couldn't swim very well. And my husband and I, we couldn't find instruction where we lived. So we got an underwater camera and we bought a DVD for total immersion swimming. And we would go record each other at the gym and come home and look at the videos. And basically that's the humble beginnings. And first triathlon, I fell in love with it. I was just loved the challenge, just ready to learn, ready to do the things. And I liked the variety. So, but I was a terrible swimmer, lots of anxiety, lots of fear. Over the years, I came to understand that was a lot due to my inability, like my own lack of confidence in my abilities. But got into coaching in about 2016, 2017, and have grown that to be my full-time business today. And I own LB Endurance, and we do one-on-one coaching for triathletes and other endurance disciplines. We do performance testing and then swim instruction, where I pretty much focus with adults for swim.
Awesome. Awesome. And so was your background in like did you do more running and cycling before you got into triathlons, or was that sort of like you went straight into triathlon as a sport?
Yeah. Growing up, I never did any of the real swim, bike, and run. In fact, I thought running was silly. I was like, why would anybody run?
I mean, fair, it
I
is
rode
silly.
horses.
Like it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
silly.
it is. Yeah, it is. It is a very silly thing that we do.
Yeah.
But I rode horses. My big
Mm.
sport when I got older was actually ice hockey,
Oh yeah.
and which muscularly translates very well to biking. So I was a strong cyclist kind of out of the gate, and I had done running because I was working professionally out of engineering school. I was doing manufacturing work and construction work, so running is the easiest sport to fit in, honestly, for all the reasons. So I came into triathlon with a little bit of running background. I had used a bike as transportation as a child, but never, cycled as a sport. And then swimming was I could tread water and I could get across the pool. That's really where I was. And
Yeah.
beyond that, I was like, open water was just the most terrifying thing I could think of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I mean, obviously you have said, and I could not agree more. And I think that this is the case for like the vast majority of people who don't really grow up doing a tremendous amount of swimming. Like swimming is very hard physically. And I think that a lot of reasons why people maybe would love to do triathlon and I hear from people all the time, and I've definitely said this myself, like, oh, I really wish that I was a better swimmer. I really wish I was a better swimmer. but it's super intimidating. And, from sort of that like physiological standpoint, why is swimming harder than running, or does it feel so much harder than running?
Mhm.
And is it
Yeah.
really just a matter of like being intimidated by being in the water? Like what's kind of going on there?
Yeah, there's a really a few reasons that contribute to this. I mean, some of it's just basic physics. You are moving through water, which is, about 800 times denser than air. So it's going to take either more energy or more aerodynamics, more hydrodynamics to actually slide through the water. An airplane slides through the air. So we have to figure that out. The other thing I think that's challenging is to do that, to be more efficient moving through the water, you're best off being horizontal. And that means, getting the feet up and the head down and the face in the water. And once we do that, then it's very hard to breathe. So, getting oxygen where we take it for granted, in our normal running, walking, sitting position, we're upright, we don't even think about breathing. But suddenly in swimming, you have to think about breathing. So just something that becomes a deliberate action like that, where it's been automatic your whole life, and it's related to your chances of survival, can kind of get to like these really basal fears, like I might die if I don't get this right, and that's terrifying. That is very intimidating. So, and then you see somebody swimming, and it's like, God, that looks effortless. All I have to do is get in, and it's easy. And the complexity is, getting to that point. So definitely, just the physics of being horizontal in water in and of itself makes swimming just very much more challenging to pick up than something like running or even cycling.
Yeah, yeah. And would you agree, like swimming, and we're actually going to talk about some of the translation and the benefits. So I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself with this question, but what you said made me think of this. Do you think that if more runners did pay attention to their breathing the way that they should, then they would automatically be more confident swimmers?
Hmm, that's a good question. I've never thought of it that way. I think potentially yes, because you actually, when you're swimming, and I do first lesson with everybody is we talk about breathing is like the first thing I check with no matter what level they are.
Yeah.
And it's like you're going to blow bubbles out of your nose when your nose is in the water, and you're going to inhale through your mouth. And generally, the reaction from, I'd say about 99% of the people I work with is like, I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
I've never actually thought about it. And then I've worked with other coaches. There's a coach in my area who does breath coaching and from more of a strength standpoint, and he's also echoed the same things. He's like, people just don't think about that, and your ability to breathe and incorporate that with your movement for some people can be, a breakthrough
Yeah.
in their ability, and not only just physically but also mentally. Like there's a big important connection there.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it certainly was something that I was like mildly aware of for myself, just, learning, especially as you are running faster and increasing the intensity of the work that you're doing, your breathing should actually slow down and get deeper, not shallow, faster breath, like that kind of thing. But it actually wasn't
Mhm.
until I went for pelvic floor physiotherapy after having my kids that it was like, okay, connecting all of that and actually really having to slow down and be super intentional about
Mhm.
putting those pieces together. And I do think that all runners probably would benefit from having a conversation about how they breathe when they run, especially if they're finding that, it is maybe interfering with their ability to perform.
Yeah, definitely. And I see that when I work with folks on their swimming. Often I ask them, like, what other disciplines do you do? What other sports? What's your background? And those that have invested in breath work, whether through sometimes very high level strength, work, but mostly yoga or even Pilates,
Mm,
and some of them have done breath work for other things like pelvic floor work. When they are able to share that, we move through the breathing work pretty quickly, and they're able to make
yeah.
adaptations much faster than those who are like never thought about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So, what are some of the like physiological benefits of swimming? Like obviously we know it's super hard work, but what's sort of going on in the body when we swim that's beneficial for us from, a fitness perspective or any other perspective?
Sure. I mean, one of the kind of the most obvious, biggest one, especially from when you think of it from a running standpoint, is that you're still able to do cardiovascular work without the impact of gravity pounding on your joints. So, if you're, we know running has a lot of aerobic and cardiovascular benefits, but swimming, you can also gain those without that constant pounding and the beating of the joints. And that's really important, especially for folks who are heavier or just getting started. We see that's physiologically a great benefit. It's a complex movement, requires a lot of core strength and coordination. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there are definite benefits there, especially teaching people proprioception. Not everybody has great idea of where their limbs are and what they're doing in relation to each other. So to master
Mm-hmm.
swimming and to advance in it, you start to figure that out whether you realize it or not. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
finally it's that swimming definitely teaches you that it's not all about power and strength, that better swimming and more advanced swimming and moving through being efficient um, is more of a goal than it is just going as hard as you can. And I think when we look at other disciplines like running and cycling, it's like, cycling is like how well you operate the bike and how efficient you can become there. And with running, definitely developing efficiency is to our greatest benefit. So swimming is like right out of the gate. Like your goal is to not push more and work harder. It's actually to become more efficient and more coordinated with your movement with the water.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. And just kind of going back to your point about like looking for efficiencies and the proprioception and everything like that, you know, when we're talking about improving a runner's mechanics or their running form, like arm swing, you want to not have your arms crossing in front of your body too much. And, like some of those little things, do you see in your athletes that you coach that there is a translation of just being able to like modify some of those small things a little bit more? I don't want to say effortlessly, but like a little bit more easily if they do have good mastery of swimming technique?
I think so. I do, and it's definitely my more advanced swimmers and swimmers who are invested in technique, who really buy into that. There I
Yeah.
definitely have people that are more advanced that just want to knock out the yards. They just want to swim as much as they can, and they don't really put a
Yeah.
lot of thought into it, and that's fine. But those who are really like want to see underwater video and really get in there and want to play, and they're like, how can I paddles? How do I use these better? What else can I do with them?
Hmm.
Those are the
Hmm.
ones that I see are able to do that. And interestingly, I've coached some CrossFitters, in the recent years because they've started adding swimming into CrossFit challenges and CrossFit games. And some of those CrossFitters, because they are so precise about their movements, and these are kind of the pointy end folks, when you get them in the water and you say, I need to make a micro adjustment, they can do it and they know they're doing it. They can feel the difference. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
such an incredible interaction because you can really have some fun on both sides.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Oh, amazing. That's really cool. So for a runner and not necessarily a runner who wants to get into triathlon and of course will need to be able to swim a certain distance in order to do that. But let's say
Mhm.
just like as a runner who is looking at their different cross training options and trying to decide maybe what they should add in, whether it's for the lower impact activity or it's, for whatever reason, they're like, hey, what should I do for cross training? Tell me more about how swimming can benefit me as a runner. What are some of the specific things that are great for runners, spending more time in the pool or in the water?
Sure, sure. I think, it's like with any cross training, it's like, why do we cross train? Because we want to break up movement patterns. So, that's one of the biggest goals is that we want to try to move our body in a different way. And often we see benefit back to the original movement. So I think that's a good piece of it there. If you're going to, have productive swimming, you're going to be interacting with the water and really sensing your environment. Like it does take that you can't I mean, you can, but I would say you can't really just get in the water and just be in your head working out your problems, okay? And be all just in there and not even thinking about, where your feet are hitting the ground or where your hands are hitting the water. Because if you do that, you'll run into a wall or you'll
Mhm.
forget to breathe, things like that.
Quite
Quite
literally, you
literal.
will run into the wall. Yeah.
Right. So it almost forces presence. Like it forces someone to be
Okay.
present and in the
Yep.
moment, because if you're gonna effectively make changes to your swimming, you have to be kind of in that very present feedback. Like I have to, there's no other way to get the, reaction feedback loop without you like really saying, I'm going to put my arm in the water in this way and what's happening as a result. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have to dial into that a little bit. So I think from a mental standpoint, it can really help people who struggle to be present. I know for me, the more swimming I did, the less I needed music when I run. And
Okay. Okay.
now I never run with music anymore. I actually want to listen to my breath. I want to hear my feet hitting the ground. I'm actually listening to my footfall and how that's changing. I'm listening to everything around me. And when I'm in the water, or if I'm monitoring somebody in the water, I'm hearing their arm hit the water. I'm listening to the breath. I'm feeling the bubbles come across my face. So it's really made me a more present athlete in all aspects. Um, and because if you're just in your head, like, and you get good at that too. Like I had a friend, she's like, how can you just run without music? And I'm like, I'm used to being in here from swimming. Like, with whatever
Yeah.
brand of crazy I might be working through or whatever I'm at, like
Yeah.
so I think that, and at the end of the day, I think swimming can also be very calming, very stress relieving, very relaxing if you're in that frame of mind. And I just like to feel the water and just kind of slide through the water. And it's so different than feeling the wind on your face. The sensations can be amazing, but you have to really tune in. So I think there can be some great benefit there, that you will see kind of sort of throughout, running and other exercise. You can kind of see it sort of pervade that if you let it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. And I'll be honest, I don't know if this is still a thing that you can buy. I don't know where the technology is at these days, but like I have actually researched, like, are there headphones that you can buy that you can
Hmm.
wear when you swim? Because
There are.
I am so tied to having my
There are
music.
many of those. It's so fun, and I know a lot of people who are like, I just can't swim without it. And I mean, I have done some very, very long swims, hours and hours, and I'll sing music in my head sometimes, and I'll have
Yeah.
phrases that just go through my head the whole time. But I've never, only once in a while do I crave music, and that's if I'm swimming. We have a equipment called Endless Pool, which is like a treadmill for swimming, basically. It's a tank of water where it recirculates, and that's like next level mental challenge for me. But I found ways around it without music because I was like, well, let's just see what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
but they
Now,
do
what
exist when you're not ready for it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, even, I don't know, I feel like even just having like music maybe playing like in the room, like if you're in a pool and there
Yeah,
was just like, just
yeah.
background noise
I
and
play it
stuff
for
like
my
that.
masters. When I coach masters, I get the speakers out and we get the music out. So when people pop up at the end of the set, they're like, "Oh, I really like the song," and then they take off,
Yeah.
and it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So like obviously sort of from that mental perspective, there's some really interesting things that will benefit runners just by spending more time swimming. Um, what about in terms of like physiologically the cardiovascular benefits like you had mentioned that
Mhm.
are lower impact? So tell me a little bit more about, some of that crossover from a
Sure.
physiological standpoint.
I'd say if we look across like an athlete's data, like when we look at heart rates, for instance, we can see max heart rates for a triathlete will be achieved while they're running, because it's the full body movement. It's the one true thing where you're fully fighting gravity the whole time. So
Hmm.
that's where we see the highest cardiac output. Whereas cycling tends to be generally lower than that. Obviously, you've got the equipment doing a lot of the work. And then max outputs in swimming, if they're sprinting, can be up to where the heart is at on running, but it also can be a little bit lower. So um, in general, though, I'd see for distance swimming, when I look at like most triathletes, because it's an endurance swim, we're not doing like 50-meter sprints for the Olympics. Um, we see the heart rates being a little bit on the lower side. So you're still in an aerobic place. But the biggest thing that matters on all of that is great technique. Because if you don't have good technique and you're just fighting the water and the legs are dragging and everything, you are going to be working as hard as if you're running almost. So once technique is able to be maintained, we can see that you can get a great aerobic stimulus in the water, which can complement, especially my athletes who are doing like Ironman. They need some days where they're still getting aerobic work, but we're not beating them up anymore. So putting them in the
Yeah.
water for even a long swim, we're seeing that yes, the heart is still working, but it's not exploding.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that can really help with things.
Absolutely. And, what would be considered a long swim? Because I think for, most of us who are not swimmers and not triathletes, like when I think about a long, I'm like, I mean,
Oh,
like one length of the pool feels long
yeah.
because it's
This
so
is
darn
this
hard.
is so subjective. Oh my gosh. So this
Exactly.
is so
Yeah.
subjective. Yeah. So if I
And I'm
would
just
say
curious.
like an
Like I'm
yeah.
not, you
No,
don't
no,
need to
this
give
is a
me like a
great
formal
question.
definition, but yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody's training for an Ironman, for instance, their long swim, I'm going to take them up to usually about like 4,500 yards or meters, depending on the athlete, but somewhere in
Yeah.
the above 4,000 range, because their swim distance in their race is going to be a 4K swim. So we want to get
Yeah.
them up to that 4,000 meters. I often
Yeah.
take them past that 4,500. I like to see them do a couple times.
Yeah.
Or if you're looking at it in terms of time, a long swim for an Ironman athlete might be, hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half of, because
Yeah.
their continuous swim is probably for most average adults is going to be between an hour and a half for their
Yeah.
Ironman
Yeah.
swim.
I don't know if
Um,
anyone listening is kind of, I'm
mhm.
feeling like some sort of mild heart palpitations when I like hear that number. So if you're listening and you
It
feel a little
sounds like a
panicky,
lot. Yeah.
yeah, if you feel a
Yeah.
little panicky at the idea of swimming for an hour and a half, you're
Mhm.
not alone. I'm right there with you.
It's so funny because like from my perspective, I've gotten into marathon swimming, and a marathon in swimming is anything over a 10K. So for me, a long swim is really stuff that's over 3 hours. I'm looking at like, yeah, something over 10K for me is a long swim,
Yeah.
but whereas someone who might be just getting into swimming, a long swim for them might be, 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
They're just doing their first sprint. 1,000 yards is going to be a long swim for them. So it is
Yeah.
very relative. And then you talk to a college swimmer or an Olympic swimmer, a long swim for them, it's like, they're generally in the pool, but for them, it might be a 3 hour workout,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
going to get way more volume. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
I love a
Absolutely.
long swim though.
Yeah. Well, and I think like you said, I mean, once you have your technique down and you can settle in and just sort of like enjoy
Mhm.
that mental state and sort of just getting in the zone in that sense, once you can do that, like, yeah, why not? Right. Like, and it's the same for people who do long runs of just once you can kind of settle into your pace and find your groove and, you're solving all your problems and, everything in your head as you're doing it. But again, just the swimming is just so intimidating. And, you think about that level of work, how hard it is when you're not used to it, how hard it is when you're not good at
Mhm.
it. It just sounds like the hardest work that you've ever done, except it's 6 times as long as your typical hard running workouts.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And it's same thing. If somebody asked you what is a long run, it's like, well, what are we training for? What are we doing?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, so I want to kind of go back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit because I have some
mhm.
oddly specific questions for you, but there's a reason to my madness here. So the reason that I wanted to have a conversation about swimming was actually because when the Olympics were on, we are recording this episode here mid-September, so just 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago that the Olympics were on. I was watching the marathon swim, which was an event that I was not previously familiar with. I had never seen an Olympic marathon, a marathon swim. I didn't know anything about it. I'd never even heard of it. And it was funny because a couple days before it was on TV, my husband and I were watching some of the swimming events in the pool. And I can't remember what I had said, but I had said, oh, I think the furthest swimming event is, say, the 800 meters or something like that. Because I mean, anything over that is just like so crazy. And I can't imagine. And then all of a sudden I see this marathon swim and I'm like, oh my gosh, how long is a marathon swim? Well, as you said, it's 10K and the Olympic one is 10 kilometers. So I was riveted to watching both the women's and the men's events and spent I don't know how many hours of my life with it on TV. I'm like, got it
Amazing.
on while I'm at work. It's in the background. Like I was just couldn't believe it. I just thought obviously all Olympic athletes are incredible, and anyone who can participate in any sport at that level is just, so amazing. But there was something specifically about that Olympic swim that my jaw was on the floor, honestly.
Mhm.
So while I was listening to the commentators, they were talking, and this was during the women's event. They had said that, some of these athletes are noted to be swimming upwards of, it was either 100 miles or 100 kilometers per week. And maybe you can clarify if you happen to know which one it is,
Mhm.
because that is a pretty big difference. But,
Yeah.
100 miles or 100 kilometers per week, these athletes are swimming. And if we talk about that as like running, or as runners, like to run 100 miles a week is a huge
A
amount of
lot,
running. Like it's a
a
lot of
lot of
miles.
running.
And there are a lot of people who do run that much and are able to run that much. A lot of them, of course, are going to be, very, very elite, or maybe just sub elite level athletes. So what I was curious about though is like, it takes a lot longer to swim a mile than it does to run a mile.
Yeah.
So if you were swimming 100 miles a week or 100 kilometers per week, like how many hours does that translate to of swimming?
It's a
Ballpark.
great question. Yeah, and I heard them talking about that too. And I would say I believe they had said 100K, which is more realistic.
Okay.
100 kilometers,
Yep.
100. Yeah. Um, so that would be for some of those athletes. That would be a peak, week.
Yeah.
Even for the amount of swimming that they're doing, even for their race distance. So depending on their paces and kind of what those Olympic swimmers are capable of, that's probably 20 to 25 hours of swimming a week,
Yeah.
for them. And the trick with swimming, and this is always the thing with my triathletes, is that running's easy, right? You're on your shoes, you get out the door, you can pretty much run from about anywhere. Swimming is I
Yeah.
got to go to the pool, I got to get ready, I got to get in, and I got rest on the wall, which doesn't count in my numbers. So, even if I'm going to an open water, I've got to have somebody with me. It's a whole thing. We're shuttling, we're doing all this stuff. So, the logistics of
Yeah.
swimming is kind of a pain and adds to the training time. And, even if someone lives at the
Yeah.
pool, that's what it is. So yeah, so we're talking like 20 to 25 hours a week would be kind of a peak week of actual in water. And they're doing a
Hmm.
variety
Hmm.
of swims. They're not swimming that whole thing at their 10K race pace. They may be doing some that is faster, um, some that is probably a lot of volume that is slower than that as well. Some real
Yeah.
technique stuff, and some sprinty stuff. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Even the average swimmer, to swim for that, if we say on average we're swimming 2 miles an hour, very average humans here, you know, you still it takes a lot of time to get that. So, you're spending three to
Yeah.
four times more swimming versus the same distance running. Probably a good
Mm,
way to
okay.
translate
Okay.
it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, but like, looking at it from that sort of injury risk perspective, because like as runners, the two things that are going to hold us back from being able to do more, like we know that more volume is generally a good thing when it comes to improving our fitness, right? But the two things that are going to hold us back are going to be how much time we can consistently train, right?
Hmm.
For those of us who don't train as a full-time job, and the injury risk that goes along with the higher volume, right? So like something's got to give. We're going to reach that sort of peak breaking point. And so for swimming, what
Hmm.
is sort of that injury risk comparatively when you're doing something that, maybe I'm wrong that it's sort of a low impact or no
Hmm.
impact sport? Like, I mean, just you're using different muscles and different joints are working in the water versus not.
Hmm.
But, if somebody had all the time to train, could
Hmm.
your average swimmer get away with doing that volume because of the lack of impact? Or is there still like
Hmm.
overuse injury and things like that that would still become an
Yeah,
issue?
there's
And that's sort of
there's
what
still
separates elite
yeah.
from not.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely it's a repetitive motion sport. So rather than having sort of the gravity-based impacts of ground contact that we see in running, instead we have this interaction with this very dense water. So anytime that we're putting our body and we're trying to, let's see, exert force against that medium and sliding it into water and pushing it through water, swimmers are very prone to shoulder injuries. It's probably the biggest
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
So What you find though is, and again, repetitive motion, if these swimmers that you saw in the Olympics are taking, anywhere from, they're probably 70 to 100 strokes a minute. So over 2 hours, that's a heck of a lot of strokes.
Hmm.
Math it out. We're talking thousands. And if they're training 100K in a week, there's a lot of strokes every day
Yeah.
they're doing. When you talk to elite swimmers, though, what you find, and as volume goes up, and even in my own work doing like my own ultra marathon swimming, you modify your stroke. You actually have sort of some different strokes that you use. So you're not always going the same pace, but you're
Interesting.
not
Interesting.
always moving the shoulder and the body in the same way. And there's different styles of even the crawl that you saw, like that front crawl freestyle. You'll see that those, especially sprinters, you watch the difference. You can see the difference, the sprinting and the 10K guys. The sprinters are using more shoulder driven, very upper body focused. You
Yeah.
start looking into the 10Kers and like the milers and like the Katie Ledeckis and whatnot, using very hip driven stroke, where we're actually using our body rotation and momentum to actually generate force. And that can take a
Hmm.
lot of the stress off shoulders. But you talk to more and more elite swimmers, and it was the same thing back in the day, whereas running, it was like run as much as you can and the strong will survive, right? But it's kind of the same thing with swimming, where it used to be, more volume was better. And what really happened was the kids who figured out how to modify their strokes were the ones who survived. They didn't try to
Yeah.
swim everything the exact same way. We also find sound, attention to technique. And if you do start to feel pain, that's not normal. Like that's not okay. It shouldn't hurt. It doesn't need to hurt. There's fatigue and then there's pain. And when you
Yeah.
have the pain, you have to do something different. So, yeah, there's definitely an issue with that. And I do meet a lot of adult swimmers that will come in and they'll be feeling like shoulder impingement or neck issues and things like that. And we modify that stroke. And the other thing with adult swimmers, just like adult runners, is they've often done other things in their life when they show up,
Yeah.
and they're like, they've got past injuries or they've got past work history or just genetics that they're dealing with. So we have to find a stroke that works for that. And that's always my goal, is that it may not look like everybody else's, but we need to find a way that their shoulders and back and everything can move many times. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough. It's a very repetitive motion, and yeah, you do have to watch that. That's definitely a big thing with swimming.
Yeah. But it's almost like you're almost cross, like even though you're doing the same sport, you're still swimming. It's almost
Yeah.
like you're getting the benefits of cross training as a runner. Because like if you're running, there's only
Hmm.
one motion. Like,
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
really
You're just moving your legs,
modify.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but the way that you, like you said, you can change your stroke. You can do different
Hmm.
styles of
Yeah.
swimming
You can do
and things
different
like
strokes.
that.
Yeah. You can. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. That can
In
that can help a
order
lot.
Yeah, in order to add to the volume that you need to be able to
Hmm.
reach that level, like it sort of just builds on it and sort of accumulates. So it's almost like cross training, even though you're still technically swimming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's really, really that's interesting. So is there a drawback? Are there any drawbacks if a runner was going to use swimming as their primary cross training
Hmm.
method? Like, would there be a point where it'd be like too much swimming, maybe not benefit? Like,
Hmm.
is there sort of a point of
Yeah.
diminishing returns there?
Good question. I think it comes down to, I mean, obviously there's the time and the logistics. I mean, that's kind of what kind of holds people back anyway. But even if you had free access to water anytime you wanted and could do it, it is challenging to get quality anaerobic work and quality speed work without
Okay.
having great technique. Because what happens generally is someone might have beautiful technique for, 25 yards, but as soon as we ask them to go 50, they don't quite have it yet, whether it's a strength or a mobility limitation,
Hmm.
or just a general endurance, muscular endurance. So then we see that technique start to fall apart, and then we run the risk of the injuries, or we're not getting the heart to that stage because there's that lag. So they have to be able to hold technique for a longer period. So people kind of get discouraged. They'll get in and they're like, well, I'm great, but I can go 25 fast and that's all I can do. And that's not enough. So
Yeah.
there's definitely the ability to hold technique for a longer period of time. There's definitely a learning curve for that. And I think one thing that we don't talk about is also the impact of being in the water, as far as your body. So skin gets very dried out. Some people really struggle with the irritation of chlorine and chloramines and other things from the water, irritating nasal membranes. So I deal with this very badly, and also swimming outside with allergies. So being really good about maintenance of your sinus tissues and doing things to like keep water out of the ears so you don't end up with sinus infections and ear infections. So there's a little
Mhm.
more around the kind of preventative care and maintenance that you need to do, which that exists in all sports, but in swimming, it's something we don't. It's like swimming all along, everything's great, and then all of a sudden I've got a sinus infection, and it's like, yeah, there's things you can do around that. So I think learning that, but I don't think in general, can you do too much swimming? Um, it's not as specific to running as we might want it to be, so I think there can be a place where you stop becoming a runner and now you're more of a swimmer using running
Yeah.
as your cross training. I do think
Running
there's
is your
some
cross training
diminishing
for swimming.
return there. Yeah, exactly. Which is kind of, I kind of go through those phases depending on what I'm training for myself. So
Yeah.
yeah, it feels like that. I use runs to warm up after cold swims sometimes. Like that's
Yeah, yeah.
so
But
yeah.
that's
So I think
the
I think there can be.
yeah, and that's sort of I think the joy and the beauty of being a multi-passionate athlete. Um,
Yeah.
but also it's nice because then, you're never getting bored. You're never overdoing
Mhm.
it in one single area. You're not just
Yeah.
doing one thing. You're changing it up. You're adding that variety that is so important just for like overall health and longevity as an
Yes.
athlete, right? For those of us who are not by any means Olympic athletes
Yeah.
that don't need to be so focused on one thing, like why
Yeah.
not change it up and have some variety in your training calendar?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
like you have said a lot of things today that I think are very interesting and very new to me. Like as someone who does not have any background in swimming, I don't know anything about swimming. I have done the odd pool swim as cross training, but like you said, the logistics, right?
Mhm.
And for a lot of us who are just kind of swimming at our local fitness center or university gym, there are certain hours that the
Mhm.
pool is open for free
Right.
swim and lane swim and stuff like that. So there's always the scheduling that goes along with it. Do you think that anybody, even if they didn't want to become a triathlete, but even if somebody just were
Mhm.
wanting to use cross training more as a runner and, look at efficiencies and technique and all those things, do you think that there is value in even just your very, very recreational swimmer hiring a coach and working with someone to get that feedback right from
Yeah.
the beginning?
I really do 100%. And I work with athletes. I work with athletes that are like have already done a lot of things and they're trying to tune up their swim. But I also work
Yep.
with adult learn to swim. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, one of the things that a coach will do right off the bat that, I always promote is, hey, are you safe in the water first and foremost? It's like, are you okay? Like if you're in deep water, are you able to tread? Are you able to rescue? Are you able to assess that you shouldn't be there or how to get to safety? Which is a big thing because some people are like, oh, I have a house at the lake. I'll just, or my friend's place. I'll just go out and swim. And
Across the lake.
ensuring safety. Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. It's like ensuring safety and knowing your boundaries is so important because running, it's like, okay, as long as you stay out of the path of cars, I mean, like you're generally going to be pretty safe.
Yeah.
But swimming is one of those things where you could just be going along and all of a sudden you are in great trouble.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
that's kind of the first thing. And I think also because technique matters so much, um, my first lesson with everyone, like I said, is I always address breathing because that's kind of like number one on the hierarchy. And usually, once we address breathing, people are like immediately like, wow, this is so much better than what I have been doing. And they've just never thought about it. And the trouble with if you go online, you're like, hey, I'm going to find some YouTube videos. There are so many out there that, and a lot of them never address this. It's almost like they assume people will figure it out. So people get in the water, they hold their breath. I mean, that's just like the natural reaction is I'm going to hold my breath. And you very quickly try running by holding your breath. I mean,
Yeah.
you would hate running. You would be like, nope,
Yeah.
that's not for me.
Yeah.
So I think starting off with a coach and feeling comfortable asking these questions because I also see, if you look at swimmers, so I am a race director for a couple of swim races, and one of them is a 10K. And if we line up all of our swimmers together and you put them all out, it is a cross section of all of the shapes and sizes and ages of people. And They're big, they're small, they're skinny, they're fluffy, like they're muscular, they're chubby, whatever. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
And you can't tell me looking at that group who's going to be the fastest swimmer. There's
Yeah.
no way to know because it's a wonderful thing that with swimming is like, my really lean, muscular, skinny guys, they're the ones who tend to struggle the most. Whereas, your little fluffy lady, it's like, hey, I can float easier, I can get better body position, I
Yeah.
stay warmer easier.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And when you go to a pool and if you don't know what you're doing, you look over at somebody, it's very hard to suss out what they're doing, what their experience is, what they're good at. And you can't tell, I'm going to ask that really fit looking guy what he's doing. He may not be the better person to ask it. Whereas like you're looking at, oh, this old gal with this, she's kind of chubby and whatever. She probably actually is doing things better, so it's one of those things that
Yeah.
we have these perceptions about swimming. So I think with a good coach and just someone to look at you, and the other part is we can't really see what we're doing. Our proprioception in water is terrible. I'm not going to lie. Even myself, I know this from watching video or looking. I have a mirror in my pool and I often do underwater video with folks. And when I show them and I'm like, have you ever watched yourself swim? And they're like, they don't even recognize that person. They're like, am I
Yeah.
really doing that? And I'm like, yeah, you're really doing that.
Yeah.
So having that outside set of eyes, however you get it, is like, I can't even, and once you develop a bad habit, it's hard to break out of it. So,
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say working with a coach and being comfortable asking the simple questions like, how do I breathe? How do I put on a swim cap? How do I kick? All that little stuff that
Yeah.
really can make the difference of whether you're going to hate it or love it. Yeah, get a coach.
Yeah, yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I personally have participated in one triathlon in my life, and
Mhm,
it was a lot of fun. It was an indoor one, and everything was just timed, like it was just
mhm.
short, and I
Oh yeah.
really enjoyed it. But of course, I took swimming lessons as a child slash
Yeah.
teenager and have not done any sort of lesson since. And it's like group
Mhm,
lessons. And again, it's mostly about safety, not about
yeah.
like, okay, we're getting ready for you to be an athlete or anything
Right.
like that. So just, kind of hearing you talk makes me think that, at this point in my life, I don't think I'd be able to fit in getting out of the house, going to a pool too often. But it definitely makes me feel like I would love to get some coaching, get some feedback in order to just enjoy the swimming and enjoy that part of cross training that much more.
Mhm. And it's fun. I found that, I've been swimming now, this will be 15 years. I've gone from being absolutely paralyzed with fear of open water to I've now swam across Lake Tahoe twice, two different routes, you know, 10 and 12 miles,
Wow.
and feeling totally comfortable with that. And what I love about swimming is that I continue to still get faster, even though I'm getting older and I'm getting to an age where I shouldn't be faster. My run times are definitely kind of making that slow decline.
Yeah.
But I still see the gains because it's about the technique and it's about the mindset more so than it is about my physical strength and power.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
it's a journey, and I know I can continue to improve. So that's what I've really enjoyed about it. Um, and it's now I do things like one of my favorite disciplines right now is actually called swim run, where we swim and we run. It's an outdoor, it's a trail run and
Yeah.
swimming through open water. You take all your gear with you. I mean, it has been like recapturing being 6 years old again.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is perfect. I don't have to run too much and I get to swim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like at any given time, like, oh, I get a break. I get to go swimming now. It's like my reward for the running. So it could be
I
fun.
love
I think
that.
swimming just can open up doors. And I think even if you're just a casual, like, I'm not really going to use it for cross training, but just to be more comfortable in water. So if you are like, hey, we're going to go visit friends or we're going to go on vacation and be on a boat, if you fall in water, to be out there and be like, okay, I can tread or I can swim over to the boat to get out. Like that is
Yeah.
such an important skill. And in the US, we really need to continue to work on that with everybody is getting people to a basic water safety level because no one should drown.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And so where I live, I'm in Manitoba, Canada. So we like lakes and lakes and lakes and just that sort of,
Yep.
part of the culture here is beaches and swimming and water activities and that sort of thing. And for young kids, like swimming lessons is, I mean, like you would be hard pressed to find a child that has not done swimming lessons. We actually have it integrated into our school system where starting in the
Fantastic.
third grade, you do it as part of gym class. And my high
Hmm.
school actually had a pool. And in order to graduate high school, you had to be able to swim like I think 20 laps in 20 minutes or something like that of the pool.
Hmm.
And that was like part of your requirement to actually graduate from that high school was to be able to do that.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I
So,
see. That was my first training was as like I think it must have been fifth or sixth grade. They used to bus us to the high school, and that's where I
yeah.
learned how to do that. I learned how to tread
Yeah.
water at that point, and it was
Yeah,
a thing because we had
exactly.
the pool, but there wasn't much training beyond that. It was like, let's just make sure you're safe if you fall in a puddle, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. And
So
yeah, I
I
agree.
wish we had more of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I completely agree. I mean, water safety is obviously hugely important, and as adults,
Hmm.
if anybody missed getting that experience, getting that exposure as kids, I mean, obviously it
Yeah.
leads to more fear and intimidation around the
Yeah.
water, which then like
Yeah.
you want to get into a new sport, but if it makes you panic just to get in the pool and the thought of
Hmm.
being in, say, an open water swim, then obviously hiring a coach and working with someone to get you more comfortable, confident, and then
Hmm.
looking at that technique is wonderful. So if a runner wanted to add more swimming into their training schedule,
Hmm.
you've obviously given us a ton of really, really great advice and lots of stuff to consider today. So are there any other tips or other things? Even I'm just thinking like logistically,
Hmm.
like should you
Oh yeah.
swim the day before, after a run, or like is there anything else that you would kind of say, hey, here's some other tips that you've got for our runners who want to become swimmers?
Yeah, I think honestly, frequency over volume is really important as you're on this learning curve of swimming. Because most people, again, when you don't have the efficiency, you're going to do a little bit and get tired quickly. So it's actually more productive. I tell this to most of my lesson students. If you swim once a week, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress. Twice a week,
Mm-hmm.
you'll maintain, maybe see some very slow progress. 3 times a week or more is where I see people really moving forward very quickly,
Yeah.
picking it up because it's that frequency, it's that time in the water. When you look at kids who did swim team and that, it's their frequency in the water that's really building those skills.
Yeah.
So being able to get in 3 or 4 times a week, even if it's only 15 minutes or 20 minutes, if it's high
Mm-hmm.
quality, it's going to be very productive. And you'll move to a place
Yeah.
where you can swim very quickly versus 1 hour a week, where you do great for 15 minutes and then you kind of have to keep taking breaks and struggling and you just never capture
Yeah.
it. So I
Yeah.
think that's important. And also, finding a supportive place. Obviously finding a coach, but finding a pool where you can kind of get in. And if you can work that next to like your other things, like you're doing strength training or mobility work, maybe your gym has a yoga class and swimming, a pool, so you can do both side by side. Again, kind of, I'm thinking I have most of my clients are very time pressed, busy adults. So we're
Yeah.
always trying to make sure, like, how do I help this get happen?
Yeah.
Um, and as far as like swimming around, the run activities, I would definitely say we like to swim beforehand because it is so technique intense. And if you're
Okay.
fatigued, it can be very hard to do that.
Yeah.
So I would definitely be swimming before my run, unless I'm more experienced and know. But yeah, and swimming the day after or the day before is generally not going to be an issue, especially if you're keeping it on the shorter side.
Yeah.
When I have athletes or like myself where we're starting training for very long swims and marathons and Ironmans all at the same time, that gets kind of tricky as to how we balance all that out. And again, that's a place where you need a coach to kind of sit back and say, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah.
But yeah, small, frequent, and make it work into your schedule. Find a place where it can fit, where you can, like I said, do your strength work, do a swim at the same visit to the gym. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great advice. So, where can people find you and connect with you? Like, I know you've talked a lot about like your
Mhm.
facilities and you do a lot of testing and
Mhm.
obviously like in person work with
Yeah.
people because of all the
Mhm.
stuff that you're able to
Yeah,
offer. Do you work with people virtually as well? Like, is there a way
I
to have
do.
a virtual swim coach?
There is, and
Okay.
I've worked with athletes. So I'm in Tennessee in the United States. So we're about 3 hours from Atlanta, and
Yeah.
but I have worked with athletes in Ecuador, up in New York, like California, where they have basically I give them instruction on how to take some video,
Yeah.
And we will do a call like this. We'll be on Zoom and we'll work through the techniques. And I'll also send them videos of here's things to work on and focus. I
Yeah.
do definitely do remote stroke analysis.
Okay.
And with the technology we have today, I mean, even an iPhone can go underwater properly. You get the little plug for the bottom and off you go. But getting underwater video is not as hard as it used to be.
Yeah.
But otherwise, my business is LB Endurance. So we do have a website, lbendurance.com, and we're pretty active on Instagram at LB Endurance. And if you're in Knoxville or if you're in the Southeast, come visit us. We're in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're very close to the river, which is where I do a lot of my own swimming. So yeah, come check us out.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much. You have opened my eyes to like a whole other world of sport that I know so little about, and thank you for answering all of my, like I said, oddly specific questions about the
Welcome.
Olympic marathon
It
swim.
was honestly, it was so cool to see on the Olympics to have them highlight and feature the 10K swim, which the way they did it in that river with those loops was quite impressive. Those swimmers with that current, a lot of them were not used to that at all. And I thought they
Yeah,
did an amazing job. So that and just all of it, it was really fun to see. And I wish they had done where they did their surfing out in Tahiti. I was like, why don't we do the open water swims over there? That would have been
yeah,
much nicer place to swim than in a river, a dirty river.
yeah,
But
yeah.
hey, water's water, right?
Yes. Yeah, well, that was one of the questions that I actually had. I figured that part of the motivation for having all of those swing events like there in the Seine River, obviously like
Hmm.
historic and like there was a lot of reasons to want to do it there, but because of the water quality
Yeah,
issues, I thought, well, if they're having the surfing
yeah.
somewhere else, like what's the big deal? Or is there really no body of water anywhere else in France
No.
that we could make
I
this
think they
work?
were really, I think they were really hard to get that. They really wanted that very
Yeah,
public, very spectator friendly venue because to be fair, watching a 10K swim, it's boring. I'm not gonna lie. Like it is like watching paint dry. Like, it can be. Like it really
yeah.
is. And
Unless you're us,
it's okay. It's
apparently,
just what
because
it
like
is.
I said, I
Unless,
was
yeah, yeah.
riveted.
Yeah, but for most people, they're like, really? And it's like versus the excitement of a pool swim. So I think they
Yeah.
really pressed for that. I think they had other venues. But the athletes did fine, even though the water quality, even though it did not look amazing, we swim in some pretty water. Again, there's things you can do about that and take care of yourself. But yeah, it's too bad it wasn't a prettier venue from the water quality standpoint. But like I said, I think the athletes did an admirable job and really showed us what people can do. It was really cool.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. All right. Well,
Yeah.
it has been such a pleasure talking to you and getting all of your tips and your advice today. And I hope that everyone listening today also really enjoyed this conversation and is feeling as inspired as I am to do a little bit more swimming in the near future. I hope that we're all going to spend some more time in the pool and get in some great cross training this coming year. So thank you again, Lana. It was so wonderful speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right, that is it for this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast, or maybe the Fuel Swim Recover podcast, as it is has been this week. We will see you right back here next week for another all new episode. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.